Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to the Radio Society of Harrow. And this afternoon, we have a talk by Derek and 0YAW. Derek is one of my colleagues at the National Radio Centre and has very kindly come to talk to us about life as a Merchant Navy radio officer. And we're very lucky this afternoon indeed, because we're getting a preview of his talk that he's giving to the convention. So without further ado, Derek, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. I feel we should be starting off with some, chalk ices or something like that. Popcorn. Okay. So as Peter has very kindly introduced me, I'm Derek Cooper, M0YAW. And for the convention, I've given it a title of Living Ilafola, the Ball Sign. Let me start off with just telling you about who I am. As I say, I'm Derek Cooper. The FISTC is more to do with my current profession. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Scientific and Technical Communication. I write technical manuals and technical books and things like that. I first got my amateur foundation license way back in November 21, and I got the intermediate just a few weeks later. And then pressures of work stepped in, and I didn't really feel I had the time to concentrate on going for the full, although I did need to do that as soon as possible. But then in the convention last year, I noticed first of all that it was being held in Norton Keys, so it was very close to me, and that on the Sunday they were running the full exam. So I signed up for that, passed it, and got my call sign. I was a BP radio officer, radio/electronics officer, from 1976 to 1983. More about that shortly. After I left to sea in 1983, I was in sales for a while. The unhappy face there is my comment on that. I was probably the world's worst salesman. I liked the engineering approach, which actually was quite successful, but I'm not cut out for a sales role by any means. And then since 92, I've been a consultant technical author, working in high tech. So MRI, electron microscopy, all those sort of fields, seismic technology and so on. One of the documents that I wrote apparently is on the shelves of the MIT Technical Library. But that's, I've never seen it there. Might be just holding up the other books. Currently I'm working in defence, but I've worked in aviation and a whole range of different fields. But what you're interested in is the subject of the talk, my experience as a radio and electronics officer with BP Shipping. For the training for that, I went to Southampton College of Technology, which has since then been absorbed into Southampton University. It was a total of 3.5 to 4 years of training, which included the electronics, the electrical side of it, Morse. The thing with the electronic training, it needed to be generic. So they weren't running a course in Redifon equipment or Marconi equipment. You needed to be in a position where you could turn up on a ship, having never seen any of the equipment before, and maintain and repair it if necessary. So it had to be generic. The outcome of that after the training was to gain the Marine Radio General Certificate, which is that. and a horrible photograph of a teenage me. I won't bore you with that. But basically, that certificate allowed me to go onto any ship and operate the radio equipment there. I wasn't licensed itself, but for the ship itself. The ship held the license. I was just certificated to operate it. Subsequently, if I wanted to have my own license for something like marine VHF, you can get a license from Ofcom to do that. So I'm now licensed to use something like this with shipping. Not that I do, but it's more for illustration purposes. During the training, we had to learn Morse code. Officially, we had to learn it to about 20 words a minute, but they pushed us to 25. The exam required us to send and receive Morse code for 5 minutes with no more than 2 uncorrected errors. And then finally, we got the marine radar examination. Going back to the Morse, I remember joining my first ship, and the senior radio officer said to me, "I'm going to test your Morse." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because you've just come from college and it's probably not very good." Fine, okay, it's your prerogative, that's great. What he didn't know was that when I was at college, I worked with 2 friends, one of whom had been an RAF radio operator, and the other one was an amateur radio enthusiast, G4CVI, who sadly went silent key some years ago. And they used to compete with each other. So when we were working each other, we'd be working about 30 words a minute and a straight key. So anyway, we all joined the same fleet. Different ships, but same fleet. And it just so happened that one day we were all in range of each other, MF range, and we set up a 3-way net, as you do. Anyway, we were working away, high-speed Morse, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the senior radio officer come into the radio room. I was sending 30 words a minute Morse with my right hand, and I was writing in the log with my left hand at the same time. He did a 180, walked out, and he never tested my Morse. The Morse test itself, the sending, we weren't allowed a side tone. So we were just relying on the key clicks. And somebody at Bletchley recently commented on the fact that I have quite a large gap, a Morse key gap, and that's the reason why. There's the picture of the MRGC. So what's the purpose of the radio officer? It all changed with Titanic in 1912. Up until that point, the main purpose of the radio officer was to send and receive telegrams, might be from captain to the head office or vice versa, in case of the Titanic. It was making money from the passengers, though we all know the story of the Titanic, and I'm not going about the film, I'm talking about the actual event. It changed. And the purpose of the radio officer was summed up in that acronym, SOLAS, Safety of Life at Sea. That was paramount. That's why you were there. And that's why the radio officer was the only officer on board whose absence would prevent the ship from sailing. The ship could not legally sail without the radio officer on board. They could sail without the captain, chief engineer, because there were other people on board who could fill that role, not the radio officer. And the actual job required a minimum of 8 hours on watch. every day while the ship was at sea. Alongside, there was no transmission available, no transmission allowed, so there was no watch keeping going on. So the way that the watches were designed were to have 4 continuous hours between 8 and 12 in the morning, 2 continuous hours between, I think it was 2 and 6 in the afternoon, and then any other 2 hours. And it depended on where you were, what propagation conditions were, and the sort of traffic that you were handling. But aside from those periods when we were actually on watch, we had something called an auto alarm, and that would be a continuous 24-hour electronic watch on the MF distress frequency of 500 kilohertz. And it would listen for something called the auto alarm signal, which consisted of 12 4-second dashes with 1-second spaces over the period of a minute. And if it received 3 consecutive dashes, it would then sound an alarm. There would be a bell on the bridge, a bell in the radio room, and a massive great bell about a foot over the radio officer's head in bed. And it used to go off quite frequently. I don't know if you've ever seen these sort of clocks. These are radio room clocks, and the idea is the red segments of the clock, 3-minute sections every half hour, were silence periods. The MF distress frequency is 500 kilohertz, but it was also a calling frequency. So if somebody wanted to call up a coast station on MF, they could use 500 kilohertz, and then they would switch to another frequency designated by whichever radio station it was. In the event of a distress happening, then that's no longer a calling frequency. They would switch instead to 512 kilohertz for calling, and just setting up establishing a communication. But the reason the silence periods are there, you'll appreciate that all these big powerful transmitters blasting away on 500 kilohertz, if somebody's in a lifeboat and they're running 6 watts, they're not going to get through. So you have these silence periods when everyone just shuts up and listens, and then you log the fact that you've observed the silence period. And then if you don't hear anything, which was most often the case, then you carry on working. There's a similar the green segments are the silence periods for T182, which is an RT frequency. We didn't have to observe those. You weren't obliged to do that unless you were an RT-only station. The solar signals, you all heard of SOS, which, contrary to popular belief, doesn't actually stand for anything. It's just 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. Sent as a continuous signal. There's no break between them. It's just an incredibly standout signal. Very, very easy to recognize, to the point where, I don't know if you remember the old Nokia handsets, and whenever they received a text message, they would send in SMS, and being an ex-radio officer, my ears would pick up, and it was so like SOS. But the one I've likened it is, if you're at a party, there's lots of people talking and somebody mentions your name, you prick your ears prick up, don't they? And it's like that. It really is. Same actually with your call sign. So Mayday, the RT version of that, and SOS are there to announce the fact that there is imminent danger to a ship. Danger of sinking, fire, anything like that. Imminent danger to a ship. The next one down is the XXX, or Pan for RT, and that's what you should use if there is danger to somebody's life or an aircraft or another vehicle. Not necessarily in danger of sinking, but perhaps they are standing to go aground. And then the lowest level, triple T, is, or Securite for RT, is a safety signal for severe weather conditions or navigation hazards. I used to hear them fairly frequently around the Gulf, around the Channel. You get rough weather, and you might get container ships that would lose a container overside, and it would be floating around and presenting a hazard to ships. So they would announce that. I've only ever sent one SOS and one urgency signal. The urgency signal was for a medical emergency on board. You send it, in this case it was via Portishead radio. And normally the operators at Portishead would have a whole list of ships that they were working, a whole list of traffic that they needed to get to. The moment they heard a signal like this, whether it was SOS or an urgency signal, they would drop all of their other traffic, pass it on to somebody else, and they would concentrate solely on sorting that signal. And in the case that I was handling, so it was a medical emergency, I sent a telegram giving the full symptoms. They then used teleprinters to pass that information on to a local hospital. They got the diagnosis back, sent that to me via Morse, and then that was the communication that went on. We ended up using a helicopter to transport that patient to shore. We were near the Canary Islands at the moment, so it wasn't too difficult.
I did use Pan quite a lot in my aeroplane. Dare I say, I did actually work on the aeroplane myself. My passenger wanted me to use Mayday, but
no, I think you're probably right. Yeah, unless the aircraft is going down.
Tricks a bit. Look, caught fire, then, didn't they?
Oh dear.
Happened to anyone?
You said you sent one Mayday.
Yes, I'll come to that later. Sort of vessel types that are common in the merchant fleet: passenger, container, dry cargo, tankers that I was on. There's a whole range of them. Basically, if it's not military, then it's merchant. So the ships that I was on, always BP tankers, all deep sea, none of the coasting stuff. They're all either diesel or steam turbine powered, ranging from a tiny little 45,000 ton thing, way up to 360,000 tons. It's the biggest ship I was ever on. We were sailing around from the Persian Gulf to Europort, Rotterdam, a round trip distance of about 23,000 miles, and it was at walking pace. You grow old waiting for that. The engines, the engineers really love this. They were anything from 19,000 horsepower up, 9-cylinder diesels all the way up to massive, great steam turbine. It's great fun. The voyages that I was on, usually a minimum of 4.5 months, The maximum I think I did was about 6 months. And then you'd get home and you were supposed to have about 3 months leave. But what with the oil situation being what it was at the time, quite often my leave would extend to 5, sometimes more months, which didn't upset me much. Right, where did I go? I originally saw that advert, well paid to see the world, and it was well paid. As a radio officer, I was paid probably about 2.5 to 3 times the national average salary. During the Falklands War, that tripled. So it was film star stuff. I personally, well, you won't surprise you, on a tanker, I was in the Persian Gulf, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Kuwait, Iraq. The European ports, Europort, that was Rotterdam. Went to Hamburg, going up the Elbe River there. I remember we lost power and they had to drop both anchors as an emergency measure to avoid hitting something else. Isle of Grain, which was in Kent. I got my family down to see me on the ship. Split in Croatia, Istanbul, Athens, Sardinia. Some of the places I'd probably have gone to on holiday, but not all of them. The best trip I ever did, I joined in Seattle. We went to San Francisco, Long Beach, and we were shuttling between those 2 ports for a while. And then we got orders for Pago Pago. And none of us knew where Pago Pago was, so we looked it up. And it's in Samoa, middle of the Pacific Ocean. You know, it was very much a case of, thank you, God. No. In Samoa, it's a tiny island, and there was only one port that could take this ship. We connected up the cargo hoses to discharge cargo. Now, bearing in mind that a ship of that nature, there are 4 cargo pumps, each of which at full bore can pump 3 tons of oil per second. There's no way they could take that. So we had 1 pump running at tickover. So we were there about 3 weeks on this tropical paradise island. It was, somebody's got to do it. I hired a car. I loved it. I hired a car. I went to the local, I think it was Hertz office. And he said, we've got 2 cars. Not, the rest of them are out. They had 2 cars. Do you want the red one or the yellow one? I'll take the red one. And he said, okay, well, there's a blanket 20 mile an hour speed limit on the island. Didn't sound much, but when you see the state of the roads, it's pushing it. And he said, please don't speed. If, when you drive through one of the villages, if the locals think you're exceeding the speed limit, they throw coconuts at you. It's another world. I went to Nagasaki. Unfortunately, that was on the anniversary of the bomb dropping, so we were advised not to go ashore, which was a shame. Later on, I did visit Japan with another company, though. Nothing to do with Merchant Navy. Indonesia, Thailand, Qingdao in China. Singapore, I've been there many times. Lovely story again. Dry dock in Singapore. Been there for well over a month. I was deeply tanned. Every evening would go back to the hotel. I'd get a shower and then go down to the bar. Ice cold beer, wonderful. And there was one evening I was at the bar, just sitting there enjoying a beer, and there was an American sitting at the bar next to me, and he kept looking over. And eventually he broke the ice and said, "Say, buddy, do you speak American?" And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, "But do you mean Apache? Navajo? Or do you mean English?" We got on quite well after that. So then, Kwinana, Western Australia near Perth, Auckland, Wangarayan, New Zealand, lovely places. And most of those places I would never have had a chance to visit without being in the Merchant Navy. And then the Falklands, more of which later. Let's go down to the equipment now. Typical shacks. They varied so much depending on the type of ship, the type of traffic that they were handling, how mean the operating companies were. There's a few examples, though. This one, it doesn't look much, but that's the telex equipment that we were using, something called micro-tour. This was actually the shack on the ship that I took down to the Falklands. And that thing caused me problems that I'll talk about later. The transmitters we were using, again, different manufacturers. They might be Marconi, Redifon. There's a range of ones. They were generally about 1.5 kilowatt peak output on HF. They could handle CW, AM, and upper sideband only. Early ones were crystal controlled. So you'd have a whole range of crystals with 2 crystals for each band. So you had 2 operating frequencies that the ship was licensed to use. And then later ships had synthesized, so you could dial up any frequency. So if you're getting a lot of QRM, you could just shift the frequency just a kilohertz or 2. One of the differences between this type of radio work and the amateur, you talk a lot about wavelengths. So you talk about 20 meter band, 2 meter band, 40, and so on. We just used the frequency bands 2, 4, 6, 8, 16 and 22 megahertz. I did use 22 on one ship, but apparently the chief officer who was in the shower at the time could actually feel the Morse through the shower. Didn't know whether he liked it, but he might have. The MF capabilities, we had, I can't remember, 6 or 7 spot frequencies on MF. They were below 500 kilohertz. And there was just the one frequency, 512, above 500. And then 2 megahertz, 2182 was the RT distress and calling frequency. And they were driving into long wire antennas usually. So one of the jobs I regularly had to do was to climb the mast with a bucket of fresh water and wash the salt off the insulators. Just as we do now in the amateur field, we need to tune for an ideal SWR. And I don't think you can see, you can just see some charts here where the radio officer would write the tuning conditions for each of the bands, just to get you in the right place for each frequency, and then you'd fine tune. And you'd have several different sets of those tuning figures, depending on the loading condition of the ship. You'll appreciate that with a tanker, there's quite a difference in draft, the height above the water, when the ship is loaded and unloaded, and that would have quite a big impact on the SWR. The receivers we used covered continuously from 10 kilohertz up to 30 megahertz. Again, CW, RT, USB, and some of them could handle RTTY as well. They were oven stabilized. This top one, that's the Marconi Apollo receiver. It was actually two receivers in one. There'd be the general purpose receiver, and then there was a high stability one which had a double oven. It was an oven inside an oven for frequency control. So when you were using it for sideband, you tune the general receiver to around about the right frequency. You were just using the filters in it. And then you tune the high stability receiver to the precise frequency that you needed. They're all analog circuitry in the early days. Later ones are fully synthesized. And the antennas that we were using, we could switch between whips, wire, and obviously you have the ability to earth the antennas as well for storm conditions. We had reserve equipment. 24 volt batteries would power equipment to the whole bank of them, with the picture at the moment of the reserve bank, but that would include an MF transmitter, receivers, a receiver, the auto alarm, and the auto distress sending equipment as well. Generally, they were fixed frequency. They weren't on MF. You just switch between frequencies. You can dial up and swing. It was, just a few frequencies.
The 24 volt because all of transistor.
It was valve.
Is it right?
Yeah. Yeah, and well, some of the later stuff would be transistorized, but I do remember one piece of equipment. I sold one piece of reserve equipment. When you switched it on, you'd hear a rotary converter fire up. So it'd be 24 volts going into one side, and you'd be generating the HT from the other side. So there's a close-up. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is the reserve transmitter, even a Morse key in the middle. Then this is the auto alarm, and there's a receiver here as well. And this is switching equipment in fuses. And then the longeboat radio. There was a requirement that we had to test this every week. We would do it during the lifeboat drills. I would train the crew and the other officers in how to use it, for the very good reason that there were too many cases where a ship was going down and people abandoned ship and forgot that the radio officer was still in the shack sending an SOS. It happened. It happened quite frequently. So we needed people to be able to operate this. It was hand-powered, hand-cranked. Some of them you'd crank the power supplied by pedal, but there were no batteries or anything like that. It would operate on 3 frequencies, 500 kilohertz, keyed AM, so there would be both AM and the RF would be keyed. 2182 kilohertz AM, and then 8 megahertz frequency for those conditions when the lower frequencies weren't going to reach anyone. 8364. Later, they introduced the EPIRB, Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacons, which communicate with satellites and alert emergency services around the world. But the antennas for the lifeboat radios were just rip aerials. You'd assemble them. They'd be like telescopic sections that you'd just slot one into the other and then get on the air. Right, 1982, April 1982, the Falklands. Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. My ship, British Y, Golf Romeo Uniform Tango, was requisitioned, and it sailed about 12 days later. It was one of the stuffed ships taken up from trade. During the MOD charter, our call sign changed every day, just to maintain a moving target, if you like. The ship was refitted for the war zone, and the refit did not include weapons. We were totally unarmed. On the radio side, they fitted a telex system. And on the deck, they added some cargo handling equipment, additional winches and things like that. All of the crew and officers on board were volunteers. Nobody was forced to go. But the feeling at the time was people wanted to go. 3 times salary in the war zone, what's not to like? And we all thought, but by the time we get down there, it's all going to be over. What can you do? And we were loaded with 36,000 tonnes of aviation fuel and 500 barrels of lubrication oil strapped to the deck railings. We sailed for Ascension Island, where we were going to receive our full orders and transfer the 500 barrels of lubrication oil to the Ascension Island authorities, and that was done by Chinook twin rotor helicopter. The orders that we received were for us to maintain radio silence and then to sail for an area, a designated area of about 400 nautical miles on each side in the South Atlantic. And there we were going to steam around at random, so nobody knew where we were, until we were called upon. We were going to receive a broadcast telex message telling us what to do. That's when the first technical problem that I had arose, and it was to do with the RTTY keyboard. It suffered static damage, so I couldn't use it to send messages. I did manage, by a quirk of ingenuity and patience, to generate some tape loops, and I used those basically just to say to, if I was transmitting, I was able to say to Portishead, that I'm unable to use a keyboard, and basically to broadcast your message to us if there is one. The RTT broadcasts were by something called forward error correction. So basically they would send a signal that would wake up the receiver on the ship, and then it would broadcast, and I'd arrive in the morning into the radio room, and there'd be a whole load of messages that had been broadcast overnight. Anything I transmitted, because of the nature of the fault on the RTTY system, I had to transmit in Morse. These were coded messages, sometimes 2,000 or 3,000 words long, Fortunately, because we were under radio silence, there weren't many of them, but I dreaded the day when I had to send one. You'll appreciate that, I'm sure. An even more pressing problem, on the 29th of May 1982, we received the undivided attention of an Argentine C-130 Hercules aircraft. You'll appreciate that the Hercules is not a bomber. They dropped 8 bombs on us out of the back. The way that the aircraft was approaching the ship was from forward to the right-hand side, the starboard side of the ship, pressing it diagonally to the aft left side of the ship. So when they dropped the bombs, 4 of them went into the water on our right-hand side, and they would have gone under the ship, and if they'd exploded, they would have broken the ship's back, and I would not be here, without question. We would have gone down, and nobody would have known where we were, and nobody would have even known about it, probably for a couple of weeks. The other 4 bombs that they dropped on us, one hit the deck, and then cartwheeled into the sea, where it exploded, and in exploding, it set off the other 3 on that side in sympathetic detonation. And the shock of that, bear in mind this was not a warship, it was not hardened for that kind of shock. It basically tripped out the alternators, which stopped the oil pumps, which stopped the engine, and we were dead in the water. The aircraft did a big circle and was coming back. The captain got onto the emergency tannoy and said, take cover, it's coming back. And without exception, everyone on board thought this was it, game over. Fortunately, the aircraft had dropped all its bombs in that first pass and flew off home. As I was supposed to, I fired up the reserve transmitter and sent an SOS. Now, the reserve transmitter, as I say, is 24 volt. Under ideal conditions, I would expect it to have a range of about 150 miles. I knew that the nearest friendly ship was about 2,000 miles away. So obviously there was nothing that was coming back for us. The engineers managed to fire up the emergency alternator, which was quite a manual process. And then once they got that running, they were able to start bringing the ship back online again. Eventually I got full 3-phase power back. I fired up the main transmitter, and then I sent the same SOS on 8 megahertz to HMS Endurance. And then all hell broke loose.
How long was it between the time that the bombs dropped and you had full power?
About 2 hours. It seemed like a lifetime.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was about 2 hours. It was the method of restarting was quite protracted. The emergency alternator is not hand cranked, but there's a big lever that you jump up and down on to basically develop pressure in a cylinder that will turn over the alternator, and then from that point you can start the awakening system. But yeah, we eventually got main power back. Now with the SOS arriving at HMS Endurance, they then transferred that message to their satellite teleprinter system and communicated it to MOD. And then the MOD basically changed the whole war plan, because if our ship had gone down, there would have been no aviation fuel, which would have been serious. So instead of each of the merchant ships having this random pattern to steer within a large area, what they did was to bring us all towards the Falkland Islands and then give us a Royal Naval guard and escort 2 or 3 Royal Naval ships, Sheffield, Glamorgan, Glasgow, I was able to make friends with some people on those ships through very low power VHF communications. And some of them didn't come back. And then finally we had a cargo transfer opportunity with RFA Ulmer, Royal Fleet Auxiliary or Ulmer. And quite by chance, my brother was on that ship. He was he was the chief officer on the RFA Ulmer. He knew that I was down there, but he didn't know which ship I was on. So when we were doing the cargo transfer, he was having a look at our ship through the binoculars, and I recognised that guy. And I was on the bridge, and one of the crew came in and said, "There's somebody on the phone for you." And I thought, oh, they're chasing me for extended warranty on the car again. But it was my brother, and we spoke to each other for about an hour. I told him what had happened. He was going to be taking part of our cargo, 18,000, or half of our cargo, in towards the aircraft carriers. And we were very conscious of the fact that we might never see each other again. That's difficult. But the process of doing a RAS, a replenishment at sea, is extremely hazardous. When you get two ships that are close to each other moving forward, there is an effect. The water moving between the ships tends to bring them together. Now, the RFA are used to doing this. They knew exactly what to do, and so they were totally in charge of this whole operation. We were told, steer in a straight line, do not deviate from that straight line. The person on the wheel just concentrates on following that course. Don't even look at us, because that's unnerving. You know, we'll do it all. And then the second technical problem came up, and the first I was alerted to it is when my brother came on the VHF and said in his usual laconic way, "British, where the hell are you going?" You know, what's the problem? You know, he looked at the chart recorder, nice straight line, looked at the helmsman's course readout, it was on the right heading. And then I checked it against the magnetic compass. And basically the ship was weaving around. So I went down to the main gyro, which was an Anschutz design. Now, Anschutz gyro compasses used orthogonal spinning mass gyros, two rotating masses at right angles to each other. And one of them had stopped. It had just run down and stopped. And so the other one was just basically drifting around. Didn't care what it was. So I reported that back. The two ships moved further apart while I got to work fixing it. I managed to do an emergency restart on that second rotor. But normally, and it's an effect, a physical effect, associated with something called the Schuyler frequency, which is, it's actually the period of time that a pendulum, the length of the Earth's radius, would take to swing. And it's about eight minutes or something like that. But normally, because of that, it would take about 8 hours or more for a gyro compass to settle on true north. We didn't have 8 hours. So I did a manual forced resetting, which I was subsequently told, can't do that, it's not possible. But when you're faced with these sort of problems, you improvise. I managed to get it settled to within reasonable parameters, within about 30 minutes, and then we recommenced the cargo transfer. And then later on, peace breaks out. Our ship comes back to the UK. We were carrying a contingent of Harrier pilots that were coming up with us. We disembarked them at Ascension Island, and then we came back. We went into Droddock, again in Portsmouth. It wasn't quite like the Canberra coming back. These were the people that were greeting us. It's my wife. But, they were waving the flag, and it was quite an emotional moment. In Droddock, we determined what damage the ship had suffered. Sort of half jokingly, after the aircraft had gone and we re-established some sanity on the ship, we thought about taking an angle grinder out and following a groove. But no, there was just basically a scuff mark where the bomb had hit the deck and bounced off. But now, seriously, we found that in Droddock, the ship had developed a very slight banana shape from the shock of the explosions. So in order to steer a straight line, there was always some opposite wheel that was necessary. Otherwise, you just go and split with large circles.
I'll explain.
Well, each bomb we estimated to be about £2,000. So if there's 4 of them, that's it can spare your day. As a result of it, I was, and other people on the ship were awarded the South Atlantic Medal. You're welcome to look at this. There's the name of the recipient etched into the bottom. But I do, on Remembrance Sundays, I wear a puppy, and I wear the miniature version of that, just a small one. It's about the size of, do you remember the sixpence? It's about the size of that. It's not to broadcast the fact that I was there. It's for I go discreetly under the poppy, just to acknowledge the fact that I came back and a lot of people didn't. So what's the situation now? We use satellite communication. Those emergency position indicating radio beacons basically killed off the radio officer's role. There are still skilled people on board handling the electronics. That will always be necessary. I left the sea a year later, in 1983. My wife is not a large person. She can be quite anxious. And I saw the effect that being away at the Falklands had on her. Under radio silence, she heard nothing from us for something like 8 weeks, and then a picture of my ship was on the 10 o'clock news as having been bombed. You can imagine what effect that had on her. And then, as I said earlier on, since 1992, I've been a technical author working in high-tech industries in the UK, both as an employee and self-employed. I volunteer. Peter mentioned my role at Bletchley Park for the National Radio Centre. I'm a STEM ambassador. I also volunteer at the National Museum of Computing, also in Bletchley. And on a minor role, I edit the local village magazine using my writing skills. So, there you are. Do you have any questions?
There's that puzzle. You and your brother both wound up at sea. What's the story behind that?
He followed in his father's footsteps. My father was a chief petty officer in the Royal Navy on aircraft carriers. my brother wanted to join the Royal Navy, but my dad said basically, well, once you've joined, you're stuck there for a number of years. What if you don't like it? So he joined. But the RFA is still Merchant Navy, but it's like the...
Well, Fleet Auxiliary,
Yeah. So he was still sort of associated with the Royal Navy, but it was on the Merchant Navy side of it. And my original career, ideal career, would have been as a pilot. I've always loved flying. And even, I wanted to be a pilot ever since I was at primary school, basically. But I was told that my eyesight wouldn't have been good enough. As it turns out, it would have been okay for commercial purposes. But I still wanted to travel around. Heard my brother talking about some of the roles at sea and decided I'd do that. But yeah, that's how he got there, and that's how I got there, really. But we didn't. He knew I was down in the Falklands. I didn't know he was, because I left before he did. So it's quite a surprise to have that conversation. I was married, so when I got back, I offloaded onto my wife. And again, she was fantastic by that. My brother wasn't married, so when he got back on leave, we invited him up for a long weekend. We did the usual sort of visitor type things, and then my wife just one evening left us with a bottle of whiskey and a couple of glasses, and then she just left us to our own devices, and we talked it through. Difficult times. Any other questions at all?
Yeah. I just say thank you for explaining how your role was. I was away to sea. I served as a deck apprentice with BP.
Oh, really? I know fire.
1952. And in many ways, the radio operations were the same. As you have, the radio room is directly behind the bridge.
Yes.
And you used to have your own chats with the radio operator. And I was absolutely amazed when just steaming through the Indian Ocean, chatting, and then it would suddenly disappear. It picked up the call sign of the ship while we were chatting.
Yes.
I thought I couldn't believe that, but anyhow, but I continued my hobby as a shortwave listener while I was at, and when he was not on watch, there you go, touch that. Yeah. And I used to do shortwave listening, going to the Mediterranean and foreign parts. Yeah. So stood.
Oh, excellent.
And I remember the automatic receiver that being set on, and she say it often went off, and big panic and period up on bridge.
Yeah.
I'd have to send one of the crew downstairs, wake him up.
Yeah.
He's offshore your bloke.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would often go off because of static. It only needed to receive three signals, basically, three dashes.
Just further to that, with you talking it through with your wife. I'm Dad now. I didn't put my wife, sorry, because when we got married, that was when I swallowed the anchor. Or I didn't expect enough time, so I didn't go back to sea after the club and the honeymoon. That was it.
It was becoming less attractive, shall we say, at sea. That you hear stories about piracy, and when you talk to people on shore about pirates, they immediately think of Long John Silver and a parrot and a patch over the eye and all that. No, these are people who've got, AK-47 guns, and they're not afraid to use them. And there was a film called Captain Phillips with, who is it? Tom Hanks, yeah. He's in it. I can't watch that. It just irritates me that, I've got enormous respect for Tom Hanks. He's a brilliant actor, but I cannot watch that film because of, the fact that it's depicting piracy. It's a true story. What we did on the ship when we were traversing waters that were potentially pirate infested, we were lucky on a tanker. There's something called a Butterworth line. We use it for cleaning the tanks. So once you've discharged your cargo and you've got an empty tank, you need to clean the inside because you don't know what type of oil is can be carried next time. And so you layer into it a Butterworth machine and you pump water into it. It's like a fire hose. But the fire hose, the water in that fire hose is about 90 degrees. And this thing is whirling around and it's squirting water all over the inside of the tank, and it's cleaning it. You pump that water into a holding tank so it can separate. So what we would do when we were in those dangerous waters, we would mount hoses around the ship and connect them to the Butterworth line. And if there was a boat that was approaching us that we didn't expect, or it wasn't official, we would turn those on. And if you've got fire hoses at 90 degrees centigrade, you don't go, it's better than a shotgun, really. So that's how I protected ourselves. But no, it was great while I was at sea, and I saw, as you saw, some places that there's no way I would have been to them otherwise. So it was great for that. But there are some aspects of sea life that I miss, but not many.
Well, I always said that if I could do the job at sea and then come home and then go back the next day, if it had regular hours, it'd be great.
Yeah.
But
Not even ferries do that, though, really.
a lot for a single person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What happened to the banana boat?
No, it's still, as far as I'm aware, it's still sailing. Yeah, no, there's no way they could, not without setting off another explosion on the other side. No, what BP would be doing, I don't know if that ship is still with BP, but they sell their ships to various other companies. So it's probably still out there, but with a totally different name, call sign, nationality and everything.
Any other questions? Well, can I thank Derek very much indeed.
Thank you.
An amazing talk. So, thanks so much.
Do you all have a pun?
Well done.
Thank you. If you wanted to have a look at the medal, you can look at the MRGC if you wish, but there's a horror page